And I'm here to talk about my case presentation, which is over the movie He Loves Me Not. The main character of this movie is Angelique. Her age is never specifically said, but she is roughly in her late teens, early 20s. She's female. Her occupation is a fine art student. She has no family mentioned within the story, but has a few consistent friends, one mainly named David. Some of the background of this movie is that it focuses on a young woman who's obsessed with a married doctor. The young woman believes that the doctor is leaving his wife to be with her. The title of this movie connects to an old school game of pulling petals off a flower to determine whether or not if someone is in love with you. The French title, which is there, since I don't speak French, I do not know how to say it, is translated back into English as To Madness, Not at All, which also can translate into To Completely in Love, Not at All, which portrays the two characters perfectly. The setting of this movie is taking place in France. It deals with isolation from self and others and takes place with a lot of art, feeling, and emotion. So the disorder that we talk about in this movie is schizophrenia, which is defined as a mental illness that affects how a person thinks, behaves, and can lead to delusions and false beliefs. A diagnosis based on the film is an obsessive disorder or a paranoid delusion. The movie diagnoses her as an enrotomania, and schizophrenia is diagnosed in almost all cultures, but is handled very differently when it comes to medication and how to proceed with handling schizophrenia. And one of the biggest stigmas of schizophrenia in our culture is that the people are violent, out of control, and crazy. So some of the symptoms that Angelique presented within this movie is number one, delusions, number two, excessive actions and inappropriate emotional responses, and number three, hallucinations. She pretty much showed all different types of symptoms of schizophrenia, but hallucinations was her weakest evidence point. So some of the delusions that she showed within this movie is that she took every encounter with the doctor as an act of love towards her and took every one of their encounters out of context, which she became a stalker of the doctor and created a life with him that was completely one-sided. For excessive actions and inappropriate emotional response, is she ended up getting rid of a lot of her personal things to try to make him happy and try to make him see her for who she was. And she goes after the person who threatens the job and does harm to her, as well as destroys her apartment for being stood up and having her emotions tainted and whatnot, as well as willing to do anything for this doctor, which ended up making her lose a lot of her close friends, which she ends up trying to harm herself as well because of the depressional feelings that she felt towards not being able to get this doctor to love her and whatnot. And with hallucinations, a lot of it was just delusions that was taken more out of context and her making up things. Like when he saved her, it led her to thinking that he cared for her again, which so it wasn't a big thing, but was definitely shown a little bit. So my treatment plan would be to send her to a facility that specializes in schizophrenia. That would be very beneficial to make sure that there is someone there to take her medication as well as seen in the movie. Since she didn't take her medication, she's not okay to go back out into the real world because she clearly still has that obsession with him. And seeing a therapist, it would be very important because she needs somebody to talk to have an outlet so she's not just internalizing everything. Sending her to an outside facility might lead to some ethical issues, but she needs to distance herself from the doctor to get better. The hardest part, as shown within the movie, would be to get her to cooperate with the treatment and trying to get control of her obsession before returning to the daily life. So if she doesn't get control, she's not safe enough to not harm herself as well as others. So schizophrenia portrayed in the film was they did a good job, but since this was a smaller form of schizophrenia, they didn't have all the symptoms as what I portray schizophrenia as, which comes with hallucinations and a lot of talking to yourself and having internal dialogue. We didn't get to see a lot of that, which is what I believe is a lot more common with schizophrenia. So that's just my opinion on that, as well as disorders just in films in general, there's a lot of misconceptions with the fact that a lot of people in films are used as people who are violent, crazy, and act out, which isn't always the truth. Like people handle their disorders and mental illnesses very differently. So it's hard when in movies you see it one way, in the real world it is not always that way. But yes, thank you so much. That's it.